Welcome everybody to the Advanced Work Packaging Community of Practice webinar series. This is our sixth webinar in the last month or so, and we're very fortunate to have Josh from O3 doing the presentation today. Before we get into the presentation for today, I just want to give you a little bit of background information. So let's take a look at the vision statement for this community. We've made some changes to the vision statement, but basically our vision is safer, more productive, value-creating project delivery through improved design, procurement, execution, and commissioning and startup. And we follow the CII approach, but we also will address other approaches like Lean in various workshops and webinars that we put on. So next slide. Our mission is really to have a community that allows us to share knowledge, encourage discussion, and really promote the adoption of advanced work packaging and other construction-related productivity initiatives. And the AWP group is truly global. We have representatives from North America, but from all over the world. In the last month, our community has grown 25%, and our target is to get it up to about 10,000 within this year. So it's a very active and growing community, and we do have a questionnaire that's going to be going out to you very soon to try and find out who our members are and what they're interested in. So be ready for that in the next few weeks. Now let's jump into the presentation. We have Josh Girvin, CEO of O3, doing the presentation today. And I've known Josh now for about 7 years. He's very active in CII. He's got a customer base that is global, lots of Fortune 500 companies. He has been on the leading edge when it comes to technology development, having 12 technology patents to his name. And he is a professional engineer, and up until about a month ago, he got around the world quite a bit. That's changed, but I think you're going to really enjoy this session, and I'm going to toss it over to Josh now.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Lloyd, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this webinar, and thank you for everyone who has joined us today. Appreciate everyone dealing with the last-minute logistics change of switching over to the GoToWebinar. Some of our participants are not able to use Zoom, so we had to make a last-minute shift there. Appreciate everyone dealing with those logistics and joining us today. So want to get started. Today we're going to be talking about what's new in work packaging and how O3 is transforming the role of the WorkFace Planner. But before we get into those details, I wanted to do a quick safety moment. And our safety moment today is on eye safety. And we always at O3 like to start with statistics to kind of drive home the importance of some of these safety tips. And so in the US, 40% of home eye injuries occur while working in the lawn or garden. So a significant safety risk. And now as we're coming into people spending more time dealing with their lawns, as we're getting into the warmer months, we thought this was an appropriate one. A couple of things just to keep in mind: wearing your safety glasses while cutting anything, using UV eye protection for outdoor activity. If you're using spray chemicals, always away from your face with a fully outstretched arm. Always wash your hands carefully after using chemicals. I think one of the things that we've all learned through this COVID-19 situation is just how much we all touch our faces. So keep in mind, you on average, people touch their face about 2,000 or 3,000 times a day. So it's important to wash your hands quickly after using any kind of chemicals. Always handle power tools with caution, never remove those protective guards from the equipment. And one that people don't always realize, but there's a connection between hydration and eye irritation. So try to keep hydrated, which is really important. So just a couple of safety things to keep in mind as we move outdoors into the warmer weather. Okay, now to get started with our main topic for today, just a little bit of who O3 is. O3 is a software as a service platform that helps owners and EPCs and contractors manage their advanced work packaging program. So we help people to follow AWP best practices, set up their projects and programs, monitor the health and adoption of those programs, and really drive AWP and WorkFace planning throughout their organization. So today, we're going to be talking about what's new in work packaging, and really what we're going to be focusing on is package management. So work package management and how O3 focuses on that process. So from after you've created that package to the time that package is fully closed out and progressed, we really are talking about that management piece in the middle, which we think has been an area that hasn't been as much focused on as that creation piece and that progressing piece. And we're going to talk about how we think that's really important and how true package management is really valuable to your projects. At the end, we'll have a Q&A session, so if you have any questions, please capture those. Feel free to submit those via the chat feature to the organizers, and we can answer those at the end. I believe Steve is going to be capturing those questions, so please feel free to submit those. So just a who's O3. Some sample O3 experience. O3 is, as I mentioned, a software as a service application, and we work with both large and small projects. Our client base is split roughly 50-50 between owners and EPCs. We're on some of the largest projects in the world where we have over 3,500 users on a single project, down to some of the smallest projects that are managed as a portfolio at an owner's operating facility where there may be 20 or 25 different projects, all of which are in the 30 million TIC or less, being managed as an AWP portfolio. So AWP and O3 scale both from the very largest projects in the world down to the very smallest. From an O3 solution perspective, we have a number of what we call solutions, or you might think of as modules inside of our software. What we're going to be talking about today is really focused on the WorkFace planning side, which is part of our on-pace solution. So while O3 does a number of things around agile project management, time on tools, tracking, training and education management, full advanced work packaging, task management, we're really going to be focused on WorkFace planning today. And while O3 supports 9 work package types out of the box, today we're going to be really focused on installation work packages. Now, what I'm going to show and talk about in terms of work package management can be used for any of these other types of packages inside of O3. So all of this functionality exists for our engineering packages, construction work packages, procurement work packages, turnover packages, test packages, but today we're really going to be focusing in on installation work packages. And so the other thing to keep in mind is that O3 as a tool can be used to create installation work packages. We do so non-graphically. So for folks that, particularly on projects where they don't have an engineering model that has been properly attributed, or that model isn't able to support the use of graphical work package creation, we have folks creating those packages non-graphically inside of O3. But really what we're going to focus on today is after those packages have been created. So whether that package is created non-graphically in O3 or O3 has consumed that package from a graphical work packaging tool, really what we're talking about today is then that management of that package throughout its entire life cycle. So we have clients who have purpose-built graphical work packaging tools that are great for creating these packages, but then they take those packages and put them in O3 through integration so that they can then manage the package through the life cycle, where O3 is really strong and an area where historically we haven't focused a lot from a technology perspective. So when we talk about package management, what do we mean? What do we mean by that is we're going to look at configuration, automation, visualization, and standardization. So the ability to configure the package management process to meet the project specific needs, the ability to automate that as much as possible to reduce the burden on the WorkFace planners and other people, key actors in the process, the ability to have visualization, to be able to see into that process and understand the progress and where you are, and then the ability to standardize that not only across disciplines within a project or across teams within a project, but then also across your entire enterprise. So those are the core components, and you'll see that as we go through. So starting with a question, how does a WorkFace Planner manage a work package in O3? Well, the answer to that is that it really depends on the project. And as we all know, there are different processes on different projects with different owners and different EPCs and different setups. And so one of the things that we found and from feedback from our clients and use cases in the field is that you really need a lot of configuration in the tool to be able to support these different processes. Now, while they're all following different aspects of the AWP best practice, the reality is that you just need a lot of configuration to support the project specific needs. And so when we talk about configuration, we're talking about things like the data requirements, the workflows, the statuses, the constraints and approval process, the development steps or process management steps, all the forms and information, and then the work package templates themselves. And so when we talk about configurable data requirements, we're talking about the ability to configure what data is required at each step of the package lifecycle. So within the O3 tool, for all of our packages and entities, you can configure what data is necessary. So you can configure, hey, this data is required in order to initiate a package. This is required for you to reach a state of what we call data complete, which is one of the things we report on, is this package data complete. And then you can also configure this data set is required for closeout. So I can start a package with a certain set of data, then to reach data complete, I need another set of data, and then to be able to close it out properly, I have to have another set of data. So configuring those data requirements is really important because that differs from project to project, as well as the workflow. Being able to match that process to the project specific process is really important. So within O3, every package has its own workflow, and the ability to adjust that workflow to match it to the project specific process is really important. And when you're adjusting that process, obviously then you also have to be able to adjust the statuses that you have throughout that process. So within O3 and its workflow engine, we also have the ability to configure what statuses in general you're using. So if you have a different name for your statuses on your project, that's fine. We can adjust to follow that status name, but then also what transitions are allowed. So can a package go from in development to approved, or does it have to go through another step in between there? What transitions and what flows are permitted by the system, so we can figure the statuses and then what flows are allowed. And then what we talk about are what we call our development steps. It allows us to configure the package creation process and our ability to track that process. So very similar to what you see in execution around execution steps. So if you're talking about tracking progress for something like a piece of pipe, you have these execution steps or work steps like stage, erect, weld, hydro, QC, punch, and those allow us to track the progress of execution in the field. Very similar to that, we have the ability to track the progress of the actual package creation and the package management. So similar to that execution, we have the scoping and estimation, materials and resources, scheduling and associations, constraint management, approvals. You can track it through its life cycle. And that's really important because then now we can understand where we are in that package creation process. We can track estimated and actual hours for the creation, allows us to understand how many WorkFace planners we're going to need on the project based off of the rate at which we're able to create those packages. So it just gives you visibility into that management of packages and creation of packages, which is really important for managing it across a project. And then we talk about constraints and approvals. You can configure those constraints and approvals by package type, purpose, discipline, stage, all of these different variables. But it's very important for the solution to be able to be configured to support lots of different constraint types and approvals. We see a huge difference in the types of approvals and constraints that our clients use. We have some clients that have maybe one approval at the end of a package. We have other clients that have 26 approvals along the life cycle of that package. And typically it has to, depends, and it's driven by the level of WorkFace planning maturity of the people creating those packages. So in some of our clients that are in, that have folks creating packages that are less AWP or WorkFace planning mature, they put more approvals or checkpoints along the way to ensure they put up more guardrails, more control, they force it down more of a defined process. And then some of the more mature clients have less approvals and sort of less guardrails up, and they allow more flexibility. So, but we see a wide range of differences there in terms of the approvals that people configure through the process. And then lastly here, you need to talk about configurable forms and the user interface itself. One of the things that we learned from direct feedback from users is, wow, O3 has all of these data attributes that I can capture, but it's really overwhelming. There's so much information in here that it's very hard for somebody to be able to do their job and understand exactly what they need to do. They log in, they get overwhelmed, there's too many fields. And so our first attempt to solve that problem was to create a summary tab that had a preset number of smaller set of fields so that you could look at a summary tab and then you could go to the details tab if you wanted to see everything. What we found though is really what you need is the ability to fully configure those forms. So now that it's completely configurable, all the forms are configurable so you can adjust, and it can be based off of individual users and their role, so that folks that have a specific role and only need certain specific data only see that data and they're not overwhelmed. And then when you talk about work package templates, so if you're not using a mobile device in the field for accessing work packages and instead are doing PDFs that you take into the field, which is really where most folks are, you need the ability to configure what that template looks like, and so that you can have the information that you need and only the information that you need so that they can have access to everything they need and nothing that they don't. You also need to be able to configure with things like logos and formatting and colors and fonts and all those, but everything is completely configurable here. In fact, you can just create a template inside of Microsoft Word and we can suck it in, and then we use that template on the way out. So you don't have to have a complex, what you see is what you get kind of editor to be able to create this. You can just make what you want in Word, however you want it. If Word can do it, then O3 can do it, and allows us to really make powerful configurations around all of these kinds of options of the information that you want to see. So that's really the first topic there around configuration, the ability to adjust the process, the ability to adjust the statuses, the constraints, the approvals, being able to make all of this configuration so you can support a project-specific process. But now, having talked about all of that configuration, people might be thinking, wow, that seems like a lot. This package management process seems challenging or complex, or that's too much for me to be able to do or my people to be able to do. And so the answer to that is to introduce automation. And so the way that we think about automation at O3 is to think about it in a couple of different areas. We think about status automation, constraint automation, approval automation, data consolidation automation, progressing automation, and alerts and reporting automation. But all of these steps or all these different pieces of the process, you can now automate. And those line up really nicely with the kind of flow of an individual work package. If you think about create, constraint approvals, releasing, and tracking, these are the kind of pieces that you think about through the life cycle of that package. And we think about that process and we allow you to automate much of that process. So when we think about status automation, we talked a little bit about you can define the workflow, what statuses can go to which statuses, but you can also automate that transition. So you don't have to manually update a status, you set preconditions. Well, when this package reaches these certain preconditions, it automatically transitions from status X to status Y, so that the WorkFace Planner doesn't have to do a bunch of manual updating, right? We're allowing it to the computer to do what the computer can do well, so that you can use the person and the human cycles to do what they're good at and solving the problems and taking corrective action and focusing on improving the process. So you're allowing yourself to change that role of the WorkFace Planner from being a manual data entry person to being someone who's enabling a good deal of automation, and then they can take a step back and they can look at the process and think of ways to continuously improve that. Status automation, again, we talked about the preconditions and what we allow them to move from status to status, similar to the approval automation and constraint automation, same concepts. What's really neat about the constraint side is because we have such robust functionality on the constraint management side, there's a lot that you can automate. You can automate who it assigns it to, the default due date for that constraint based off of the planned start date for that package. Anything, whether that's a hard constraint, you can automate much of the constraint management process and ensure that the information it's assigned to the right person. You can ensure that it's the right type of constraint. You can ensure that it has the right type of due date for that constraint. So there's a really robust functionality around the constraint automation piece because that's one of the components where we've been in production for so long and had so much feedback from folks. Similarly, on the approval automation side, You can automate the assignment of who's responsible for submitting this, who's responsible for approving it. You can set approval triggers. You can then so that it'll automatically create that approval at different stages of the process. One of the things in the beginning, we thought, hey, we could have all of these approvals out there, but one of the challenges is that that can be overwhelming to people. So you want to lay out the approvals, and you want those approvals to appear at the right stage of that package. So as a package moves through the process, the approvals are automatically created that are relevant to that process. So rather than having a checklist of approvals that overwhelm people in the beginning, as you move it through a process, the relevant approvals appear automatically associated with what's required to move to the next phase of that process. And the approval automation, similar to constraint automation, allows you to auto-assign a lot of key data attributes. So who's responsible for doing the approval, who's the planner user, what role or user groups are responsible for that approval. So very robust auto assignment functionality, automation functionality there around the approvals as well. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the data consolidation side. And really this comes to the point where when you're going to release that package, you need to automatically pull in all of the relevant information that you need to be able to execute that package. So that might be pulling in the most recent drawings, that might be pulling in the most recent information or attributes from the materials management. Whatever that information is, you need to be able to consolidate and automatically pull that in when you go to release that package. So you don't want the WorkFace Planner to have to go through and do a manual collection and collation of these drawings and of this information. So it's important that you can automatically pull all that data in and then present that out to the field so that they can leverage that for the actual execution of the installation work package. And then you move into execution in the field, and that's where you want all of this information, this progress updated information, to be automatically calculated and automatically shared and visualized. And that can be not only the execution in the field, when we typically think about work progressing, like we talked about with rules of credit and execution steps in the field, but also that process of creating or managing that package. You want all of that progress information, the actual and earned hours of that process, both the package process and the execution process. You want that to be done automatically and surfaced up so that folks can have clear visualization into that information. And not only do you want it to be easy to access that information, but you want to be able to automatically push that information out to the relevant users. And so one of the things that we spend a lot of time thinking about is how do we automatically push out the relevant data to the relevant parties so that people don't have to spend their time trying to figure out what should I be looking at. You want to identify things for people, push it out to them automatically, and then they can take action. So the computer can solve this problem of figuring out, okay, what's a change that's important, or where's there a challenge, and then who do I need to notify. By putting in configurations, people can subscribe to different information within the tool. You can also choose to watch individual packages, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But as these certain triggers happen, then that information can be pushed out automatically to people so they don't have to spend their time trying to search through the data and figure out what information is relevant to them. So we talked about configuration and making sure that the process is configured to match the project specific process. And then we talked about, okay, well then once we have this process mapped to the project specific process, how can we automate that? And now it's important to note that not 100% of everything can be automated, right? That your goal is to get in automation and try to automate the 80% and then use the person, the human, to solve that 20%. We're not trying to build this perfect configured system that automatically does absolutely everything, press a button and it builds the plant. What we're saying is the computer can be configured and set up so that it can automate a good deal of that process so that you're not using humans for doing things that a computer could do for them. And then the humans can spend their time on the corner cases and the issues and the things that pop up that you haven't accounted for, some of those unknowns that appear. And that's one of the things that when we think about the constraint side, a lot of constraints we get automated and pulled in from other systems. Like on most projects, we integrate with the materials management system, and we're able to pull in those materials related constraints and consolidate those with all of our other constraints from permits and drawings and other information. But there are also those constraints that don't have a structured data set and a purpose-built system for managing. And that's where O3 allows you to capture some of those ad hoc constraints, or those things that aren't being handled in a nice structured purpose-built system where O3 can just pull it in. But it allows you to have that flexibility of, let me get in everything that's automated, and then my WorkFace planners can make sure that we're documenting and capturing all those other little things, so we have this holistic and consolidated view of constraint management. So just an important point there, you're not going to be able to automate absolutely everything. You aim for that 80%, and then you use your humans to solve that last 20% for some of those unknown unknowns or ad hoc things that appear during the process. So switching gears a little bit to talk about visualization. So a couple of different visualizations that some of which people are familiar with. So the Gantt view. So within O3, you can view your installation work packages in a Gantt view. You also have a view of what we call a goal view, which is thinking about the process, looking at the health of the process overall, not a specific individual work package. We have what you call my view, which is the user-centric or me-centric view of the data. Show me everything that's relevant to me. And then what we call our custom label view, which is the way that you can group data together and look at groups of information around some custom attributes that you've assigned to those. So obviously, as a robust reporting tool, you can slice and dice the data by area or discipline or purpose or any other attribute that we have inside the system. Those are table stakes. But we also have some ways of looking at the data that we think are pretty interesting, and we'll talk about those here. First, on the Gantt view, now we know most folks are experienced with Gantt views, but some things that we've done here that we think are valuable. One is the color statusing of the duration bars of those packages. Here, you're seeing that status displayed based off of that color displayed based off the status of the package. We can also do that based off of things like the progress of that package, or whether it's constraint-free, or whether it's critical path, or these other kind of things. But here you're seeing that coloration. It's a really nice visual that you can jump in and understand in a timeline view the status of your packages. You can filter and sort that by your look aheads, which I think is important to be able to quickly look at that data. And then also one thing to note here is the ability to change the columns on this view. So a lot of Gantt views restrict you to a certain set of columns. You're able to add any columns that are relevant to the IWP data set to this Gantt views, and you can arrange those columns in any order. You'll notice here we have a column called open constraint count, which is a column you can add so you can see those against that timeline view of those IWPs. Next view we'll talk about is the goal view. And as I mentioned before, this goal view is taking a step back and looking at the overall WorkFace planning process. So this isn't looking at a specific individual IWP, rather it's looking at goals for your AWP program. So in your AWP program, you may have certain goals. You can create your own user-defined goals and measurements inside the tool. And then you can also pull from our library of AWP best practices, so you can understand from a best practice perspective, which those are based off of CI and COA research, as well as our own subject matter expertise and that of our partners and just learnings in the field. But you have this library of AWP best practices that you can pull from to measure and understand the health and adoption of AWP on your project. And so one example of that, and those goals can have owners and planned start dates and finish dates, and you can track progress against those. You can have mitigation plans. You can have action plans that you assign for those of here are the steps that I want to take of corrective action to improve against those goals. But those goals can be things that we pull from that best practice library. And so this is an example of looking at constraint management and measuring the health of constraint management within the tool. And we're looking at a lot of different data. This is a subset of information that we measure against constraint management, but it's looking at and understanding, are you actually doing a constraint management process? Are you doing it properly? Are you identifying sufficient constraints and early enough? Are you assigning them to owners? Are you clearing them far enough ahead? Are you releasing those packages constraint-free 4 weeks prior to their planned start date? So rather than, just saying, hey, I think we have a good constraint management process, or we have a good WorkFace planning process, or possibly doing manual audits on a quarterly basis. This is real-time, continuous, data-driven auditing of your WorkFace planning or AWP process, so you can actually understand from a data perspective the health and adoption of AWP or WorkFace planning on the project. So that goal view allows you to take that step back and visualize and understand from a higher perspective the overall health of that program. And then this is sort of the opposite of that. This is really driving down in. Instead of taking an overall view, this is driving down in and looking at the me-centric or the user-centric my view. And so within the tool, you can create a view of the data of saying, hey, what's everything that's relevant to me? And how do we determine what's relevant to you? Well, if things are assigned to you, or you've interacted with certain entities and established that you're interested in that particular entity, that indicates that that's part of your view, that's information you're interacting with. You can also explicitly state that on any entity within the tool by just saying, hey, I want to watch this entity, and then you get notified of any updates to that package. And it also falls inside of your view when you take that my view of the data inside of O3. So it's one way where if you're working on a small subset of a project, you can quickly get to the data that's relevant to you without having to just filter down by standard things like area or purpose or discipline. Instead, you can say, show me everything with which I've interacted or that I've indicated is important and relevant to my job. Somewhat similar to that is this idea of the custom label view. So the custom label view, well, instead of being based off of the me-centric or my view or user-centric view of the data, this is a custom grouping. So example that we've seen this used for would be maybe a project has a get out of the ground sprint that they want to do before winter time, and they want to finish a certain set of packages. It's not contained to a certain CWA. It's not contained by these kind of standard attributes. Instead, it's a grouping or a sprint of packages that today there isn't a logical attribute that identifies all of those. Well, now you can put those, you can create a label called the get out of the ground sprint, and you can assign those all the associated entities to that sprint, and now I can view that data from that perspective. So I can look at visualizations, I can look at progress, I can look at Gantt charts, I can look at however I want. I can now all of the various visualizations and access to that different views inside the tool, all the widgets, all the Gantt charts, everything. You can now filter those down so that you can see that view of the world by that kind of custom grouping, if that makes sense. So we talked about here in visualizations a couple of key things, and I didn't go through and talk about the standard visualization. So O3 has over 500 different widgets now for viewing things like IWP skyline charts and over duration IWPs and all these kind of information that you want to be able to use to understand the progress of your process, of your project from an AWP perspective. So I didn't talk about those. Those are kind of table stakes from a visualization perspective. Talked about a couple of things here that I think are important from a work package management and work packaging process perspective. One is leveraging the Gantt view, but then adding to that some additional attributes. So being able to pull in more data so you can understand when I'm looking at that timeline view, what are some other attributes associated with those IWPs that typically you've been constrained to a certain set of data about the IWPs. And then being able to do the coloration or the status visualization of those packages during that Gantt view as well. And then we talked about the goal view, which is something that O3 focuses a lot on, which is this idea of measuring that health and adoption of the overall process. So taking a step back and looking at that process. So we talked about in the automation phase, one of the things that automation enables is it allows your WorkFace planners to be a little bit more focused on the process and continuous improvement and being involved in improving that process, as opposed to being manual data entry clerks throughout that process, being someone who has to spend their time chasing down information. So by automating the alerts, by automating the process of pushing that information out to others. So if I assign a constraint to somebody, it automatically notifies them. They get an email, they get an in-app alert notification. If they don't complete that constraint, coming up to the due date of that constraint, they get pinged again. If it's past due, they get pinged. I can see everything that I've assigned out to others and what's late. So by using tools and automation around that process, you change the role of that WorkFace planner from being a chase down expert who spends all their time on phone calls and emails and text messages trying to find data, trying to push people to do things. Instead of spending their time doing all this manual data entry related stuff, now their time is freed up because we're able to automate that. We're able to use the computer to identify what information needs to be pushed out, automatically push that information out, drive that behavior, so that now you've changed that role of that WorkFace planner to be one of someone who's focused on the improvement of that process, as opposed to just focused on chasing down information or being a data entry clerk. So, and then once you've made that change of that role, the WorkFace planner, through that automation of the work package management process, now that WorkFace planner and the WorkFace planning leads and the other folks involved in the WorkFace planning process or ADP process, now they can leverage those goal visualizations to understand the health and adoption of AWP and WorkFace planning on the project, and they can build action plans for continuous improvement and course correction. So it allows you to move from being a cog in the wheel of doing a bunch of manual chase up and a bunch of manual entry to being someone who can look at the process and think about how do we continually improve this process. And then once you have that process humming and going and improving, now you need to move into how do I standardize that process. And one of the things that we hear a lot is said, wow, there's a lot of configuration here, there's a lot of automation you can set up, but that sounds like a lot of effort. And one of the things that has been kind of a differentiator of O3 is the fact that it doesn't take 6 months to stand up and start using. Right? It's a modern SaaS application where you can go from statement of work to first value in 2 weeks. And that's something we didn't want to lose as we added additional configuration and additional automation, additional setup to that process. And the way that we accomplish that is by using standardization. And so the biggest standardization is around project standardization, which is through project templates. And so that's how you standardize from project to project. But also within projects, we have default dashboards, we have shared layouts and shared dashboards that we'll talk about that allow you to standardize and decrease the amount of time it takes to take advantage of this configuration and automation that we have within the tool. So what are project templates? Project templates, and you can take any project within O3 that you've set up and used, and you can mark it as a template. And then from there, you can reuse and launch any project using that template. And so all the configuration decisions you've made, all the automation you've set up, all of the data configuration, all of that you've set up, now you can just leverage that when you start your next project, and it's automatically there. Now, typically there's some tweaks you need to do when you launch a new project, but it handles the 80–90% of all of those decisions and all of that configuration and implementation setup, and you can just keep churning out projects. And our customers now are able to stand up their own projects because they can leverage this templating functionality. It's also important to note that from an enterprise perspective, you typically have more than one project template. So you might have a project template for your small cap brownfield projects, and a different project template for your greenfield mega projects, and maybe a different, if you're an owner, a different project template for your EPCM lump sum projects where your role is a little bit different. So you can have multiple, you can have an unlimited number of project templates, but typically what we see with our enterprise customers is that they have 3 or 4 or 5 different project templates that map to their AWP project archetypes. So that project template concept allows you to turn out those projects and to standardize your approach across projects. And then within a project, we have a set of default dashboards. And so you can, out of the box, just launch a default dashboard. So we have default dashboards for key meetings, things like your constraint review meeting or your IDP release review meeting. So we have set default dashboards that we've developed and tweaked and worked on with subject matter experts to allow you to start from something. So you have a set of default dashboards that come out of the box, and those are our default dashboards from an O3 perspective. But then you can also set up your own default dashboards for your company that you share with your projects as well. But you have a set of default dashboards, either the O3 out of the box defaults or your project or your company specific defaults that you can then leverage to get to those dashboards set up quickly. But then there's also dashboards that become valuable that you've tweaked and you've changed, and your team are really humming, and you go, wow, we've got this great dashboard. Well, now you can share those dashboards with other people. You can share them with other groups. You can share them with your entire role, share it with all your WorkFace planners, and share it with the entire project. And you can even collaborate on these dashboards. So I can share it with individuals, and then I can give them edit rights, and then we can collaborate on the building of these dashboards. But it allows you to, you can get started quickly by leveraging the defaults. And then as I tweak those, or I build my own, or I become a power user, I can easily share those with other people so they can take advantage of those as well. And then if they want to further tweak it, they can just clone that, and then they can make their own changes and make that dashboard their own. So a lot of sharing there on the dashboard side, as well as all the layouts or views within the tool. So I may go in and the view of the data here is completely configurable. I can change what columns are here. I can change groupings. I can change the layout of the columns. I can change filtering and all these things. And then I can share that. And the reason why that's important is that because it allows me to standardize the way that we think about it. So if I create a set of dashboards that I use for this team for constraint management on this particular portion of the project, I can share that with other teams so that we have a standard approach. Or I can create one for one contractor, and then I can share that across contractors so that when I go in and I meet with a contractor and we have our review meeting, I'm looking at the same data every single time, and I don't have to rethink, okay, well, how does this contractor think about this data, and what does that mean to them? No, I've got a shared view where now it's the same and it's standard across the project, and it's standard, and I can standardize that across projects, or I can standardize across a program or a portfolio, but it allows me to move to this more standard way of looking at things. I can tweak, and then I can share that to standardize across teams, across projects, across portfolios, so that as I move resources or I move people around, or if I change my perspective across different projects or different views, I'm looking at the same information, and so I have a standard view across those. So talked about a couple of things today, talked about being able to configure to map to the project specific process. So when we talk about work package management, again, we think about it as everything that lives between creating that package and progressing and closing out that package in the field. It's that middle ground, it's that frozen tundra that's been largely not a focus point previously, and we think it's really important. That's where the process is. We think it's really important to have a strong process in there and have strong functionality from a technology perspective for that middle ground. But from the time you create the package to the time that you progress and close out that package, all that stuff in the middle is really important. And so the configuration to map to the project specific process, to be able to adjust the workflow and the statuses and the constraints and approvals to map to that your specific process. So maybe you have more approvals or less approvals depending on the level of A to P maturity of the folks involved in the process. And then being able to take that process and all that configuration and automate it, automate the 80% so that the computer can be handling and doing most of the work. So you can be automatically moving it through a workflow, automatically updating statuses, automatically creating and assigning constraints and approvals, automatically alerting and updating people throughout that process that they have activities or tasks that they need to do. And then give you visualization into that process so you can understand, where am I in the work package management process? So that idea of these development steps, similar to execution steps, where now I understand what the work package management process is. I've defined it, and now I've associated hours with it. I've estimated an actual hours. I have progress. I understand where I am. I'm mapping the work package process and tracking and measuring that and visualizing that information. I'm not just tracking execution in the field, which we've always done and we know is important. I'm actually tracking my process from a planning and development perspective as well, and I'm visualizing that information. And then I'm leveraging templates and defaults and sharing capabilities to standardize that across teams in a project and across projects in a program or portfolio and across even an entire enterprise. And by leveraging this view and focusing on that package management process, it allows us to adjust that role of that WorkFace Planner and move them from being a manual data entry person and a manual chase up person who spends all their time on phone calls and emails and text messages trying to find information. It changes that role from doing all this manual non-value add activities and changes them to someone who can be thinking about, how do I continuously improve this process? How do I make this process more efficient? How am I doing against my WorkFace planning, health, and adoption? I'm measuring the process. I'm looking at metrics. I'm thinking about improvement. I'm not spending all of my day doing manual non-value add activities. So that concludes my presentation for today. Really appreciate everybody's time. I want to turn it back over to Steve for questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, absolutely. We do have some questions that have been rolling in during your presentation. So I think the first one that we'll look at is a question that was submitted, I believe, anonymously. Oh no, it's from Enrico. Which is the software framework behind O3? Apex, Power BI, SQL Server, Oracle RDBMS, other?
Sure. So great question. So we do not use Power BI. We do leverage tools from a charting perspective. So they're built in to the O3 application. So we use dev tools. So for the developers on the line, we didn't hand roll all of our charting capabilities. We're leveraging development tools for that because that's a commoditized thing. And I think folks on the development side understand the charting pieces and what you do from a BI perspective from a charting, that's been commoditized. So we leverage some dev tools there. We don't hand roll that, but it's built into our proprietary software. On the back end, our structured table data is in SQL, but then we also have some some unstructured data and some graph and other things from a that allows us to do some interesting things on the data structure side. But our structured table data is in SQL, and then our front end is in Angular, and I don't know what number we're up to now on Angular 10 or something like that.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And we'll keep maybe in the same vein of technical questions related to the O3 platform itself. From Shakib, are there plans to have 3D model visualization for the IWPs built into the platform? If so, when is O3 planning to have this rolled out?
So O3 has the ability to consume the 3D model data from, we're able to consume work packages created graphically from 3D model related tools. And so we have a number of clients where they have a 3D modeling, graphical driven workplace planning tool. We consume that data. We also can pass data back and drive the status visualizations in there. So we have a number of clients where we're passing, it's a binary integration where we're consuming and passing that data back. So certainly understand the value of the 3D representation of the data, as well as the ability to create those packages using graphical format.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And there's a couple comments here, not necessarily questions, but I'll just maybe toss these out to you for any feedback that you might have. This one from Yasser. He says that his experience in implementing AWP operations in the Middle East and Gulf region projects is that creating and configuring the required data and elements as a prerequisite for each IWP to improve on-site productivity is the primary rule and golden piece of the chain to make AWP a successful process and to obtain fruitful results. Wondering what thoughts you might have on that.
Yeah, so certainly, particularly when you talk about automation, the data is critical. And so, and also when you talk about visualization, so O3 has an analytics and business intelligence component to the offering. And so obviously, the old adage, garbage in, garbage out. So the ability to consume data from other tools is a critical component of O3. And we spend a lot of time trying to make that as easy and efficient and accurate as possible. And so we have what we call our data management tool set. And so we can consume data. We use RESTful APIs for the technical folks on the call. We can consume data through real-time integrations through RESTful APIs. And it's important to note that our API is not some small subset of our functionality. As a modern SaaS application, our user interface uses our own API. So every single piece of data that you can access in the tool can be moved in and out via our API. So it's not some limited subset. So we have a really strong API. We have documentation around that. We have some customers who write their own integrations against that, or we also sometimes write those integrations. But then we also understand the reality is there's a lot of tool sets out there that aren't so sophisticated and aren't using APIs and don't have that capabilities. So we also have robust import export templates where you can configure an import template where we can consume a native flat file from another tool set. You can configure the translation and any kind of mapping, field mapping and all that stuff inside the tool, set that up as a template, and then you can bring that data in and out of the system very easily. We also allow you to, if you have the appropriate permissions, to export all the data to flat files as well. In fact, you can schedule those exports. You can have it send out an email with the attachment of an Excel file on a recurring basis to a distribution list. So we make it really easy to move data in and out of the system. And then we also have a lot of functionality built around understanding the health of that data management process. So within O3, you can define, O3 is what we call system aware. So it knows you by configuration, but it knows what systems are in play on the project. I know I'm using P6 for scheduling. I know I'm using Smart Plant Materials for materials management. I know I'm using, this, XYZ for this, that, and the other. You configure these data sources. And then in O3, we have the data requirements that are configured. These are the fields, format, and frequency that we expect to see that data, whether it's real-time integrated or done through a business process of import-export. And then O3 has a bunch of visualizations around understanding whether or not that's actually happening. Are we getting all the data that we expect to get? Are those imports, are they actually filled in? Are we seeing the data change? Or are we just getting the same import over and over again? So we've put in a lot of controls around that data management process to improve the ability to consume that data. So we allow you to configure what data do we expect, when do we expect it, and then we have a lot of tools that understand are we getting that or are we not.
Thank you very much. That's obviously a great comment and in-depth reply. Let's talk a little bit about just some fundamentals. A question here for someone just getting started with work packaging, where would you recommend they start?
Sure. So if we're talking about an advanced work packaging perspective, what we see most clients start with installation work packages and then work their way back. We have seen some folks start in engineering and work their way forward. But we've seen most people solve the WorkFace planning problem first, or take advantage of the WorkFace planning benefits first. And so they focus on installation work packages, and then typically within that, we see people focus on pipe and steel first, just because those are discrete components. So you have your materials, your tags are kind of one-to-one there. And it makes it a little bit easier from a data perspective, both from if you're using a graphical packaging tool, obviously pipe and steel is where those are really strong. And then from a materials management perspective, it's usually a little bit easier because you're dealing with uniques. And so from a material readiness perspective, you don't have the bulks challenge where you have to understand supply and demand curves to understand whether you have materials for certain packages. When you're dealing with just a single unique item, it's a little bit simpler. So I think I would say that where we see a lot of people start is with IWPs first, and then typically pipe and steel, because those are uniques, tagged items.
Okay, excellent. How do you approach change management and chart the impact on your packaging status reporting? This question from Francois.
Yeah, so change management is the greatest challenge to introducing any new process or technology. And there's a couple of ways that we approach that. One is that we actually have a training, tracking, and management functionality within O3. So we have the ability to track we have the ability to track people's attendance and whether or not they're following learning paths and getting trained on the actual process. So from a personnel perspective, when we talk about change management, we focus on putting together learning paths and understanding what people need to know and certifications, and then tracking whether people are achieving that. Now, if you're talking about change management from a package perspective, well, then the way that we tackle that is we have the ability to consume data from these different sources and then automatically detect any change to that. And then we have some functionality to notify and do some advanced revision notification. So an example that's a common one is that we typically consume the MDR, Master Document Registry. Either, it might be an Excel import or it could be an integration with the tool set. But then when there's a change to a drawing, we'll say maybe it gets put on hold or there's some revision change, the tool can automatically put the associated package on hold and then automatically notify the planner or other people associated with that package has been put on hold because of that change. So we have some advanced revision notification a functionality built in and some change detection functionality around the data management side that allows us to address some of those change management challenges. So I covered kind of two sides of change management because I didn't know which one they were talking about there.
Fair enough. Yeah, definitely a very large topic. So I've got a comment and a question, both from Mark Mehta, Mark being part of the technology, construction technology world as well. First of all, his comment, what, you're saying we cannot automate everything and we need humans? Glad to hear Josh state this. This is a fact. We do need human intervention. And then his question was, to get an EPC started with O3, how does O3 aid the EPC on initial configuration?
Sure, great question, and Mark, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think a lot of technology people will like to tell you can automate everything, but I think we just know this is a complex problem, and there is a need for humans there. So when we talk about getting EPCs started, we have a number of engagement packages that we've developed over the years, where we have dedicated project managers, and we have a dedicated and defined process for our implementations, and starting with the kickoff and kind of going to go live, and then our after been live for a while, we have a optimization review workshop. So we have a defined process that our client success team runs for implementations, but typically, we start off on the configuration side with a discovery workshop where we go through and understand the specifics. Clearly typically during the sales process, we've captured some of that, but then we do a more in-depth kind of technical discussion at the kickoff, and then O3 handles that configuration and setup for the client, and then we train the trainer on their admins on how to handle that. We come back in after it's been live for 3 months or so and do an optimization process, which is sort of a smaller subset of that same discovery process, but looking for ways to optimize that configuration. And then we handle that for the clients. But our goal at O3 is always to reach self-sufficiency, our clients to reach self-sufficiency. So we view professional services as a necessary evil to get the most value out of the software. But we like it when our clients are able to deploy the software on their own and don't need us, and we get there pretty quickly with our enterprise clients.
Awesome. So let's we've got about another minute or two left. Maybe we'll close the conversation today on one last question that's more conceptual, I guess, high level in nature. Have you seen that using technology can reduce the need for as many WorkFace planners or make the WorkFace planners more efficient?
Yeah, certainly. So when you see an increase in efficiency, obviously that means that you can accomplish more with with the same resources, or you can accomplish the same with fewer resources. That being said, where we've seen a lot of success is not necessarily a reduction in the number of WorkFace planners, but more of a transforming their role so that they're spending less of their time doing the non-value-added manual tasks and more of their time optimizing the process or engaging and changing where they spend their time. So You can certainly, through automation and through tools, by making a process more efficient, you could accomplish the same with fewer resources. But where we've seen really successful projects is rather than trying to do just the same with fewer, they've done more with the same.
Awesome.
Great.
Well, I think, yeah, at the top of the hour here, I'll pass it over to Lloyd to close us off.
Yeah, I just want to thank Josh for a great presentation. We had a really good turnout and lots of great questions. And please follow up with O3 if you have some other questions. We'll be posting the recorded version of this webinar. So if you want to go back and send it to your peers or review it later, please do. But again, thanks, Josh, for a really informative session.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lloyd. Really appreciate the opportunity. And thanks for everyone who came today. Really appreciate it.